My name is Rebecca Thistlethwaite. I am the program manager of the Niche Meat Processor Assistance Network. I'm here today with my supervisor, Dr. Lauren Gwin, who founded NMPAN about 10 years ago. And then we have a great lineup today, including Ferd Hoefner of the National Sustainable Agriculture Coalition, Brian Sapp of White Oak Pastures, Denise Perry of Lawrence Meats, Greg Gunthorp of Gunthorp Family Farm, and Carrie Balkom of American Grass-Fed Association. You should be able to see most of our screens. Brian is joining us by phone, so you won't get to see his beautiful face today, but he's here. So today we're going to be talking about some policy stuff. We decided to put this webinar together to just inform folks how they could get more engaged in USDA Food Safety Inspection Service policy, and kind of where are the different entry points for processors and others to get involved in federal policy, because we all know how much it impacts our businesses and the farmers that we work with. So we're going to start off with Lauren and Ferd giving a background of kind of how we got to this point. And then each of our panelists is going to share some of the issues that they're most passionate about and some suggestions for how those issues might be resolved at a federal policy level. I should back up and say that NMPAN is a member of Extension. We're a national community of practice of meat processors, butchers, extensionists, regulators, and others that really want to see small and mid-scale meat processors thrive. We put together about 4 to 6 webinars a year on topics that our members ask us to share more information about. So this is one of those topics that people want to learn more about. And with that, I think we'll just jump right into the slides if Lauren maybe wants to start.
Sure. Yeah, I can do that. So thanks, Rebecca, for setting all this up. It's so great to see all these great panelists. I wanted to just give a very quick overview before we jump to Ferd. I wanted to let folks know that the Niche Meat Processor Assistance Network has always had an eye to public policy that affects meat processors and the local and regional meat supply chains in which processors are such an important link. And, you know, I'm in a cooperative extension program at Oregon State University, and this is a big part of what an extension program can do. We can provide information about policy to the businesses and stakeholders that we work with, and we can also make sure that the people who are making policy, whether it is, as you see here, in Congress or within an agency, have the information about what those businesses and stakeholders are really doing, wanting, needing, and how they're affected. So I think of NMPAN as a place where that information and those perspectives can be gathered and flow back and forth. And so, but we are not an advocacy organization. We are lucky to be good friends with in an excellent advocacy organization, a national coalition, and work with them and provision over the years. And I'm going to give folks a very quick overview of just some of the key policy things we've worked on, because this is not new to folks who have been involved with NMPAN for a while. Back in 2009, after there was in the Farm Bill, the interstate shipment of state-inspected meats provision, which NSAC was heavily involved with, we did a lot of work around the rulemaking, making sure people had the information, and we did a bunch of educational work around it. When the HACCP validation guidance came out, there was a comment period. That's more of an administrative thing, as rulemaking is. Those are administrative. And then we really worked with NSAC for our first time working on legislative policy with them was around the Local Farms Food and Jobs Act, which was a marker bill for the Farm Bill, the last Farm Bill. And so there were provisions related to meat processing that NSAC said, well, you're involved with a whole network of meat processors. We have some ideas, but what does that network think of these ideas? And so we were able to bring some information and experiences to that. And that, you know, at least they tell us that was useful. So I was going to move the slide, thank you, and just say that what we're really going to talk about today, and Ferd is going to go into more depth on this, is this new shift. It's not that we haven't worked with agencies before, but this has developed over the last few years. The reason we're here today, these meetings that we're talking about, several years ago, Ferd had some encouragement from inside USDA, part of the Know Your Farmer, Know Your Food group, to say, you know, you could take some of these priorities that maybe didn't get through the Farm Bill and talk to the agency directly about, are these things that could be done by the agency? And Ferd said, you know, well, that looked like a good opportunity, and he formed a small processors working group. And some of us in the speakers today and others were part of this group in 2015 and 2016, where we had phone calls. We did a survey of our processors. John Mark Hack with Local Food Association did a survey of processors. And through all these different processes, came up with this set of recommendations. And then Ferd was finally able to meet with former Secretary Vilsack in 2016. And as I know it, I'm going to tell Ferd's story here, but Ferd said, well, Vilsack said, why don't we have a meeting? There should be an in-person meeting with FSIS. And the ground was laid for it. And so after a lot of hard work by Ferd and others, the first of those meetings was held at Greg's Place, Gunthorp Farms. And the picture down there is a picture of some of the people who were there. And then after that, there were a set of revised recommendations that were provided to FSIS. And then there was the March meeting that we'll talk about, and the June meeting, and now we're getting ready for an October meeting. So that's where this all came from. And then I'm going to turn it over to Ferd and let him go deeper on this as he sees fit.
Great, and thanks, Lauren, and welcome everybody to the webinar. Really glad we're doing this, and my hat's off to NMPAN for leading the charge on these issues for such a long time. They're invaluable to us as a national advocacy organization that works very broadly across the wide range of farm and food policy issues. So we don't pretend to be experts on processing or on FSIS policy issues, but we do our best to help out. So just a word of background on National Sustainable Agriculture Coalition for those who might not be familiar with us. We've been around since the late 1980s. We're a national coalition of local and regional organizations from all parts of the country that work together on federal policy reform. We have 120 member organizations, pretty much coast to coast, almost every state. And we work broadly across a wide range of issues: conservation, agricultural research, farm programs, farm credit. But one of our many areas of work deals with food safety, and that work has delved primarily in the last half dozen years with the Food Safety Modernization Act, which deals, of course, with produce farms, not with meat and poultry. So for sort of growing out of that experience, working more with the Food and Drug Administration than with USDA on Food Safety Modernization Act with produce, it got us more thinking about what we could and should be doing in the USDA FSIS meat and poultry space. So that was a little bit of how we got to this place, and then working with Local Food Association and many of the people on this webinar and with NMPAN directly, you know, we're able to begin to develop some recommendations. So just a few things. One, just a little bit more detail on my meeting with former Secretary Vilsack. It was in part a meeting to discuss you know, what had been accomplished and what hadn't been accomplished during his incredible 8-year tenure at the department as secretary, and especially in the local and regional food arena. And I posited at that meeting with him that, you know, many strides had been made in many areas, and certainly light years ahead of where the department was before his tenure. But I noted that the meat and poultry area, particularly the processing arena, was a place where not as much progress had been made in terms of policy and in terms of engagement of the agency. And so he was, much to his credit, he was very open about it and said he didn't disagree with that analysis, and that, you know, what would we recommend? And I suggested, well, you know, amongst other things, we should get top agency personnel dealing directly with small and very small, including on-farm processors directly. And so that sort of led to this engagement. We didn't know exactly what exactly it would look like, but as Lauren has suggested, we've had 3 meetings now, including the first one in Indiana, where as a result of that meeting, we came up with some recommendations that FSIS endorsed, and then another set of recommendations that the stakeholders endorsed, but that will take more time to get FSIS to a place where they can be totally supportive. So we've begun that process, and I thought I would just, we can come back to this later, and I can maybe go into more detail if necessary, but I'll just give you a sense of those initial recommendations that that the agency was able to endorse. And all of these got forwarded to the secretary and got his approval as well. So they have sort of official status, although obviously the administration has changed. And so we'll see where that goes in the future. But one of the agreements was that we would hold quarterly regional meetings of the direct stakeholders with the agency top brass. And they've agreed to that, and I must say they have held up their side of the bargain. At the meetings to date, we've had either the administrator or the deputy administrator and the heads of inspection, labeling at 2 of the meetings, humane handling division director at 1 of the meetings, and the outreach director at 2 out of the 3 meetings. So we don't consistently get exactly the same people, and of course the agency administrator has just resigned and moved on, so we'll be dealing with the former deputy administrator is now acting administrator, so I suspect we will see her at the Oregon meeting that's coming up. So anyway, long story short, here's some of the recommendations. Hold the quarterly regional meetings. So hopefully that will continue on into 2018, and we'll have another set of 4 regional meetings then. Keep the lines of communication open with a very direct agreement by the heads of the divisions at FSIS that stakeholders who are experiencing, you know, significant problems in real time should feel free to pick up the phone and call them directly. So that could be very useful depending on the situation. A commitment to a variety of intensified or more robust outreach efforts, not just through the help desk, but including that. One of the recommendations that emerged from the last meeting in Maine was very soon they hope to stand up a small and very small plant help button that would be directly serviced in real time by the help desk. Another one was that they were open to us soliciting input on guidances that needed changes or revisions to better serve small and very small plants. An invitation to possibly do what they call a correlation meeting at 1 or more of the regional meetings, where you actually have the local and regional inspectors and supervisors together with the plant operator and other people who would come to the meeting and do sort of, as I understand it, sort of a real-time discussion with everybody present. So we haven't done that yet, but they're open to that. And then a couple of other things that haven't happened yet, but I think will happen soon. One, there'll be an edition of the Small Plant News that deals specifically about the design of the verification process and the verification testing and how that works relative to small versus large plants. And then an agreement that NMPAN will do a set of webinars once the new label submission and approval system is out. And I think that's now out, so that will hopefully be coming up soon. Then there was a whole list of additional recommendations that we all on the stakeholder side agreed to, but that we're still working through with FSIS. And then at each successive meeting, we pick up on some of those themes. We don't try to cover every issue at every meeting, so we're do a little picking and choosing depending on the location and the issues for that particular plant or region. But we've had a set of stakeholders who have been to all of the meetings, and some that have come just for the one that's particularly in their region. We try to keep it fairly small so that it can be very conversational with FSIS and that we can make progress. So looking ahead, guess I can save this to the end, but the big thing looking ahead is that we don't just want to have conversations and little small improvements. Eventually, we want to really formulate some administrative changes that the agency could make that would make the world a better place for very small plants and their economic and viability and their stress levels and everything else related to it. So I guess that's most of what I want to say. I should just add briefly that AMS, Ag Marketing Service at USDA, has also been involved and has had a representative at each meeting, and they plan to continue to be involved, even though their bailiwick is different than FSIS. They are the agency that's sort of the head of the local regional food work at USDA, so they come to it in that light. And then we've also dealt somewhat with other things outside of food safety that USDA could be doing. And in fact, at the main meeting that we just had this spring, we actually had representatives of a community development financial institution there to talk about their work in terms of financing either renovations or new plants and what's involved. And we had a very good discussion with the agency about how they could help that process, the financing end of things, if they would put cost estimates on their various requirements, something that they don't do now. But they said they were open to exploring that and bringing some input back to us at the Oregon meeting on that issue. So that's an example of how we try to follow up and make sure that these conversations are actually leading to real change. So I think I'll stop there, Rebecca, and turn it back over.
All right. I am going to turn off the slideshow for a bit, and that way we can see all of our beautiful faces once again. So now we're going to head into the panel discussion. Again, the order is going to be Brian Sapp of White Oak Pastures in Georgia, Denise Perry of Lawrence Meats in Minnesota, Greg Gunthorp of Gunthorp Family Farms in Indiana, and then rounded out with Carrie Balkom of American Grass-Fed Association. And we're going to have about 10 minutes with each panelist, and then we're going to wrap things up and try to have 15 minutes of Q&A at the end. So if you have a burning question, please save it or pop it into the Q&A box, and we'll try to get to it at the end. So with that, let's start off with Brian.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us. First off, thank you, Ferd, and your group for putting these meetings together. They've been very beneficial. I've been lucky enough to go to all three of them, and learn some things and taking some things back to South Georgia. Sorry you can't see me. Our internet connection here is not good enough for a video, but we'll try to work through it. So one of the big items on my list, to attend these meetings and kind of get some feedback, to FSIS and USDA, was on, equality of inspection, both within districts and across districts. What I've heard at these meetings, traveling across the country so far, is that, the district offices and inspectors within those in those districts, have some differences in inspection. The interpretation of the law, the interpretation of the rules, which makes it very difficult for small plants to get around. When I started here at White Oak Pastures back in 2008, I was kind of a one-man show, and I know a lot of small processors across the country are still in that boat. But to kind of get some equality within the districts, when inspectors change in a plant, to kind of know what's going on and what's expected of the plants themselves. So when we had the first meeting at Greg's place, I kind of thought that was going to be a one-hit wonder. We'd have a meeting and kind of fall off, but I was very impressed with the folks from USDA FSIS of being engaged with us, and I felt like they were really listening to what we had to say, about what our challenges are and what we're going through at the plant level. So going across those 3 different districts so far, we've made some headway. I've seen some changes so far that I felt like these meetings have been beneficial to everybody. Kind of the next part of it, kind of some specialized or different rules for small facilities that doesn't necessarily meet the cookie cutter standards or regulations that are at the larger plants. Some of those, the biggest one being kind of humane handling and stunning, where in a small plant inspectors are on the kill floor all day long. They're taking the notion to inspect or go through the stunning process on every single animal, where in larger plants they may be on the kill floor for an hour doing their stunning verifications. And for small plants it's difficult, and that's one of the changes that I've seen in the Atlanta district, especially with stunning and some different ways of handling a misstun or a non-egregious animal handling situation where they don't lock the doors on the plant, but are engaged with the facility to work through problems or come up with solutions for those. One of the items that kind of came out of the animal handling part of it, which has been kind of at the forefront over the last few years, with USDA, that we're trying to kind of push through. They have what they call an ombudsman for the processing side. So that's kind of a liaison from the plant, kind of an outside view from the plant to deal with the inspection service. And we thought that would be a good idea on animal handling issues as well, to kind of have a go-between where we don't cause tension within the plants, but kind of move that outside to help the small processors work through those issues. We've had some feedback on it. I think the change is a little more in depth than we kind of envisioned to begin with, but I think it's something they're interested in doing. And going back to what Ferd said earlier, some more outreach type situations, with more information available to small facilities, to get through new regulations and kind of deal with those issues as they come up. I think that's about all I had. We look forward to the meeting coming up in Oregon here in a few weeks, and keep pushing this ball. I think it's an opportunity for small facilities, small processors, small farmers as well to voice their opinions and kind of let the regulators know where we struggle and try to get some things through to them that maybe they wouldn't see every day when they're not in our facilities personally.
Okay, thanks, Brian. Why don't we move on to Denise? Gotta unmute.
There we go. There we go. Sorry. I have 2 screens going here. I don't know how to use technology. I'm used to a classroom, not a computer room. I want to thank Ferd and his group and NMPAN for hosting this and pushing these kind of policy discussions. It finally feels like we have an outlet to get a little closer to the uppers making all these rules for us, and it has been very beneficial. A little bit about myself. I grew up in Minnesota. I received my master's and PhD in animal science, meat science from Missouri. Taught at a small 4-year university for a little while before transitioning into my current role at Lawrence Meats. I currently oversee the food safety and animal welfare programs at our facility. I also work with FSIS regulatory and third-party audits, all the communications that are involved with that. It's been a new role from university into production, but I'm so happy to be back into the processing environment. Lawrence Meats is a small niche market processor. We slaughter bison and beef and then process all the way most species through hot dogs and shelf stable products. So we do quite a bit. I started to get involved in this group just a couple months ago, actually. I didn't know they existed until a couple months. Well, NMPAN I've been part of, but the policy group I just found out about recently through NMPAN. I joined the June meeting in Maine. Was very pleasantly surprised to see just the responsiveness of FSIS and their willingness to hear us out and listen and interact and talk and try and come up with solutions to some of our issues. And they're actually a legitimate want. I mean, I saw an actual want. A couple of issues that I'm most passionate about, depends on the day, but today, most days it's going to be humane handling. I take humane handling very seriously ever since I was learning about this industry and during my academic years, but I also have seen it from a processing side and how it can affect the personnel. I myself have harvested animals. I've knocked, I've bled out, I've done that. I understand the emotional impact it has on the people that have to do it, especially the expectation of 100% accuracy 100% of the time. Mike Lawrence likes to say he pushes humane handling for the humans, which is our staff, and the ethical treatment of the animals. And we've recently become very concerned about the pressure that's being put on the small plant worker, that especially the slaughterman or woman that's charged with knocking that animal and expected to be perfect. And so we get quite passionate about that in our facility, just as passionate about our people as we are the animals and the good treatment of the animals as well. So we're hoping that we've seen, based on chatting with Brian and past meetings that we've had, and this is encouraging relative to the knocking rule and the suspensions and a little bit of, I don't want to call it leeway, because you can't expect 100% accuracy. If you've ever had to be the one knocking, it's not an easy job. You're dealing with live animals that move unexpectedly, no matter how restrained you have. And so I want to just mainly talk about 1958 Humane Methods Slaughter Act. They basically touched on 4 points, and that's that the use of humane methods in the slaughter of livestock prevents needless suffering, which is, I think, going well into that. The policy is well hitting that. There's no doubt in my mind that we are focused on that. The policy and regulatory is focused on that. However, I think there's 3 points that have been ignored over the last several years, and that's that this act is supposed to result in safer and better working conditions for persons engaged in the slaughtering industry, that it brings about improvement of products and economies in slaughtering operations, and that it produces other benefits for producers, processors, and consumers, which tend to expedite an orderly flow of livestock and livestock products in interstate and foreign commerce. And so in the matter of suspensions, it definitely is not bringing about improvement of products and economies in slaughtering operations. I believe there's other routes of ensuring, of FSIS ensuring that humane handling is occurring without the detriment of the business, which means suspension and shutting down the facility, which also includes a whole bunch of animals out in the pen that are not allowed to proceed through the process, and that can become detrimental to their welfare as well. The other aspect that I find that I have some passion in, and I think that the two can relate, is that's training of inspection personnel relative to small and very small plant dynamics versus large corporate. At the last meeting, Michael Wells was part of the FSIS. He's one of the big head guys for training. Had good conversations with him, and I hope he continues to come to the meetings. So I'd like to have some more. It sounds like right now the avenue for inspectors is to start at the large corporate facility, and then they eventually trickle down and make their way down in the small, very small plant. And really things is backwards. There's a whole different dynamic and expectation and pressure on those inspectors in the large corporate facility versus a small mom and pop shop who doesn't have the resources, doesn't have the lawyers, they don't have the attorneys at their backs pushing on inspection. They really could use a supportive role of inspection. It doesn't mean that inspection has to be, you know, babying them, but not so adversarial, because a lot of these inspectors that come from these large plants trickle down in the small facilities, come with a chip on their shoulder because they've been treated kind of more aggressively by the corporate end of things versus the mom and pop shop. We're just trying to survive. At Lawrence, we're a little bit more fortunate to have extra resources, but when you start to get down to the shops where the same person that's stunning the animal is also the one checking the books, taking the phone calls, making the schedule, operating the cut floor, these inspectors have to realize there's a lot of pressure on them, and they're not purposefully ignoring regulation. They just are trying to stay afloat and run their business while keeping the product safe. And so hopefully we can make some headway in how things get trained as well. I know I'm probably going long. I was going to start my timer. So quick, like, what can we do to help this? I'm hoping there's been a lot of talk about getting rid of the one-shot verbiage relative to humane handling. I think maybe a more realistic approach would be, why not add one shot every 97 per 100 temps? That's the 97% accuracy that aligns with the American Meat Institute humane handling guidelines. So maybe assign a statistic to it, to the one-shot policy, so give a little bit more realistic approach and take a whole lot of emotional and physical pressure and toll off of those that are tasked with stunning these animals. I think we forget that there's humans behind those stunners. And then FSIS really needs to be more aware of public perception of the words and actions that they're taking against industry. The complacency of district inspectors, and this is all a generalization, but I know there's some districts that are more cognizant of this than others, but they have to really understand the attitude of the lingo they use can be dangerous and irresponsible to our industry. And I'm talking about those publications that get readily posted. So just yesterday, I was addressing a concern with wording used relative to a recent humane handling discussion with the district. And their response was, well, that's what we write, but you know what we mean. And I found this very concerning and flippant and very self-serving, and they have no clue how damaging this can be to our industry. And so public perception of that, you know, that's just what we write is way different than what we know what they mean. One example is that I was reading the humane handling enforcement actions not too long ago. One of those posted on the site, the USDA Humane Handling Enforcement site. I'm going to quote directly from the suspension letter. This is what was reported by district. The animal appeared conscious, alert, remained standing, moving its head and eyes, looking around the knocking box and vocalizing, screaming in pain. We have now assigned anthropomorphism to a regulatory action, and that's scary. We should be scared about that. And it's completely unprofessional of a regulatory body to allow that kind of wording to get put into what is supposed to be a scientific approach to inspection. And so I think we need to be aware of that, and it's something that I'm going to bring up if I'm able to go to the Oregon meeting. So on top of that, if we can start looking at the training, maybe make maybe a little bit more sophisticated, maybe assign certain inspectors a new role of trainer inspector, ones that have positive records with their knowledge and their relationships with these small processors, and having them be in a trainer role for the small facilities, things like that. So I'm going to stop because I know I'm rambling on. So that's what I have. Thanks.
Thank you, Denise. That was good. Very, very useful to have that kind of level of detail. All right, Greg, it's your turn now. And you only have 10 minutes. Can't take up the next hour, okay?
Okay. Thank you, Rebecca. I think that you know me well enough to know I'm quiet and shy, so I won't talk for very long anyway. So good afternoon, everyone. Greg Gunthorp, Gunthorp Farms in LaGrange, Indiana. We own and operate a very small on-farm red meat and poultry slaughter operation. USDA inspected 2 processing shifts. We raise pigs, chickens, ducks, and turkeys on pasture, and our primary customer base is upscale restaurants in Chicago, Indianapolis, surrounding region. Our biggest customers, just somebody, few people might recognize them. Our largest customer, Rick Bayless Frontera Grill in Chicago, and our one of our other largest customers is Kitch Fix, which does the food for the staff and the players at Wrigley Field for the Chicago Cubs. We have about 20 full-time and about 10 part-time employees on the farm, and I've been quite active in advocacy work around local food and sustainable agriculture for a long time. Ferd actually got me on the USDA Small Farm Commission back when Glickman was Secretary of Agriculture and Clinton was president. I've done several things since then. Was involved, like what they were talking about earlier, that local food association survey. Also got to represent sustainable agriculture, very small plants, and very small processors on the Pew Meridian group that is looking at revamping the Meat and Poultry Act. Today I'd like to talk a little bit about what I feel like the accomplishments that we've gained from these meetings. I think anybody that knows me well knows that I probably also like to talk about the challenges and the negatives. I think we do need to point those out. And then I'd like to talk very, very shortly on what my thoughts are going forward from here, what we all could do. I think, first of all, I think it's a great step forward that USDA Food Safety Inspection Service is holding these meetings. I think it was, I think same as Brian, that I thought the meeting at our farm back there in October would be a one-time deal and it'd be over. But it was definitely took it as a huge positive that they did send an awful lot of top agency officials, and they continue to send a lot of top agency officials to these meetings. I think the current acting undersecretary and current acting administrator were at the meetings prior to their being appointed to these positions. So I mean, they've definitely sent some top level people out, and the fact that they're agreeing to quarterly meetings, if we can hold them to that, to continue so that we can present our issues, I think that's great. I'm a big fan of the fact that this is a difficult space to operate in as a very small plant. I think the statistics bear that out. You know, they're talking about humane slaughter earlier. I was glancing over the last quarterly enforcement report by USDA. My very, very rough numbers, but might be off a couple either way. Out of 90 enforcement actions, and that's enforcement actions across everything, not just humane slaughter, 43 of those were suspensions for humane slaughter in very small plants just in the last quarter. That's almost half of their suspensions are humane slaughter suspensions in very small plants. I don't believe for a second, nor do I believe any taxpayer or consumers believe that that's that humane slaughter is that large of an issue in very small plants relative to large plants. I don't think anyone believes that, including USDA. I think that they have to have numbers, and it's because of the way little plants tend to be built, where people stun in the same room that the inspector does inspection in. Is one of the biggest challenges. And then I think little plants tend to not have the time and the resources, so they can end up being bullied more than large plants. I think personally, I think while they have been great in coming to these meetings, I still think we're at the stage of we're struggling to get them to completely appreciate that the actual problem. We still get an awful lot of lip service, in my opinion, about that the regulations are identical in little plants and big plants, and that Their inspection force is 100% properly trained. And the overwhelming majority of them do a great job, but USDA has some real challenges in dealing with problem inspectors. And in little plants, they tend to cover that up and make the situation much worse. And they've promised that they're going to address that, but I know for a fact that I've tried to help out one plant significantly south of us, and even though some of the people that were at the meeting said that they were going to make that better, they actually made the situation worse for him. So we still have a lot of work around that. One issue that I think is a challenge, and I think that shows a little bit of a lack of seriousness on USDA's part, is that they've showed up at these things, but they failed to go to the plant tours and the farm tours. I think some of the people in Washington, D.C. don't really appreciate the difference in local food and sustainable agriculture and pasture-raised animals in really small plants dealing with local food and selling direct to chefs and direct to customers. This, in my opinion, is an innovation in the marketplace, not a return to something of the past. And I think that there's still a lot of people, including top-level officials, that don't understand or appreciate that difference in the marketplace. I think that too many people, too many times, see fancy labels. Not going to steal too much of Carrie's work, but I think this ties into it, where I don't think, they see antibiotic-free as the niche in chickens, or just grass-fed in beef, where there's pastured chickens and only 5% of the grass-fed beef in the United States actually is coming from small family farms processed in the United States. Most of it is being raised in feedlots sold by the big guys, or is being imported from overseas. So I think that USDA plays a role in both of those ends, not enforcing labeling regulations and not understanding that there's truly a difference. My one other challenge, they presented out at our place that they'd hired an ombudsman and presented that as if that was something great for us. After doing more research, that's actually was so that an ombudsman hired for whistleblowers and for people to get the industry in more trouble was not actually an ombudsman to help out little plants. Going forward, I do hope that they provide ombudsman for the actual aid of little plants. And going forward, I think we as an industry need clear and decisive needs that we actually want from the agency. And then after that, I think we need to bring in consumer advocacy groups, because I think we have, as I alluded to before, I think we have taxpayer support. I think we have huge consumer support. And I think we need to use those, because I think USDA is still at the convincing stage on getting them to see the true need for this. And I think we can convince them, but we can much easier convince them if we bring taxpayers and consumers on board, because they're all behind us. They all want they all want family scale agriculture and small and very small processors in the U.S. Thank you.
Thanks, Greg. All right, Carrie, it's your turn now. If you want to unmute, there you go.
Unmuted, and I'm going to start my timer. Good morning, everybody. Thank you all for including me in this fantastic group of producers and processors. And Ferd has put together an amazing group of people to start this process. I've been to all the meetings and looking forward to the next one. As American Grass-Fed, we started in 2003 trying to work with USDA on the grass-fed label claim when it came into when AMS was starting with that, and we worked with them until 2007 to make sure that the grass-fed claim was genuine to the consumer, which meant no antibiotics, no hormones, no confinement, and 100% forage-based diet. And unfortunately, the USDA finally decided that the only thing they were going to address in the label claim was what the animal ate, not where it ate or how it was treated. So we started a third-party certified program, and we've been certifying in the marketplace 100% forage grass-fed since 2007. So we've been in the marketplace for 10 years with ruminant standards. We just rolled out our dairy standards, and we're working on pork standards as we speak. Having said that, we have noticed in the last probably 36 months a steep rise, a spike in the marketplace in labels of grass-fed. There have been a lot out there in the past, but they've been smaller labels. Now we see bigger labels with the word grass-fed on it. And following up on those, what we're finding is that term is being horribly misused, and it's being allowed by FSIS. And at these meetings, we've had the chance to talk to the people at FSIS about the process of giving a large industrial feeding operation a grass-fed label, and understanding that when they get their label, it's all paperwork. There's no visit to the farm. There's no follow-up, there's no inspection, there's no nothing. So they're rubber stamping some of these labels. And as Greg alluded to in his conversation, was that you see these fancy labels with pasture on them, or blades of grass, or barns or things. And it's disingenuous to the consumer to believe that product is actually coming from a farm where you think of an animal out on pasture or being cared for. These are feedlot animals. And we're very concerned about it. We're thrilled to be part of this process where we can get in front of these officials from our agencies. It came out in the meeting that we are 90% of their constituency, and I think they finally realized that, and they're trying to work with us. They really don't know how yet, so that's why you've got all these wonderful people working on your behalf to make sure that happens. There's the Humane Slaughter Act. We've worked with Denise and Ferd and Greg and some other people on changing the language so it's more equitable for everybody in the marketplace, especially small processors. And one of the reasons is that when you are a small producer and you go to a small processor and there is an issue, it has really deeper ramifications to the processor, the producer, and everybody involved when that plant is shut down. Now, it says in the regulation that they can get these things straightened out in just a matter of minutes or hours, and we find that that's not true. We're finding that it's probably days before this is done. And when you have animals that need to be processed, and you can't get it done because of some regulations that are inequitably enforced, then we need to change that, and that's what we're working on right now with all these wonderful people and Ferd at the helm. And NMPAN being the watchdogs for us and getting things done. With the 43 suspensions in small plants, if you look at the downtime between on those plants, it's not hours, it's days. And that's one thing we're working on right now is quantifying the difference in the time on the downtime on the plant. So for our producers and the people that we represent, the people that we work with, we're going to work very hard to make sure that doesn't happen. And also for producers who are looking for processors, working with your processor and knowing the things and the thing that Denise brought up, and I'm kind of skipping around her because I was doing points that I wanted to make sure, is that understand that these small plants with the person that's doing the knocking is under tremendous pressure. And I think that bringing out what Denise said was very, very, very critical. It's a hard job, and it can be a debilitating job. And I think we need to pay careful attention to the way those people are treated and not make them out to be the bad guys. It's not their fault. It happens, and we just need to make it equitable moving forward. As far as the labeling thing, I could spend hours and days. Just know that if you see a bogus label or something that you think is bogus in the marketplace, if you'll let us know, we'll follow up. As several of my board members have said, we never wanted to be the grass-fed police, but if we have to, at least we'll follow up and make sure that somebody finds out. And we have talked to FSIS at these meetings and brought it to their attention, and we're trying to work with them to make sure that it doesn't become a epidemic of all this stuff going on. So we're working on that. The other thing is that a lot of times you'll see people say, well, just go to the farm. And first of all, it's very time consuming to have a lot of people on your farm when you're trying to get work done. the other thing is that if the consumer doesn't know what they're looking for, it's kind of hard for them to say, these are the practices that we're following. And we love the fact that all of the small producers and processors have transparency in their everything, but we're trying to help differentiate you guys through labeling claims and make sure that those are genuine for you, because we understand the constraints that you're under. You don't need 50 people on your farm every weekend when you're trying to have some family time. And we know that the processors don't need to have 50 people there every day checking them out as well. So we're going to work really hard on making sure that the message stays clean and clear. And I know I've got about 3 minutes left, but I think we need to leave some time for questions if there are any, and let everybody kind of wrap up. So thank you, and I'm just thrilled to be here with all of you guys today. Thank you.
Thank you, Carrie. So Ferd and I are going to do a little wrap up, and then we're going to open it up to Q&A. So if you have a burning, please pop it into the Q&A. So I'm just going to say that it was mentioned a couple times that the next meeting in the fall is going to be in Oregon, and Lauren and I and Ferd are working on a schedule for that. We would like to keep the meeting small, so it's going to be, you know, a handful of processors and some extensionists and some other regulators at this meeting, but it's set for October 25th and 26th. So if you are of that region and want to attend, please get in touch with me or Lauren. And Ferd, what else is sort of happening now? I know that there's some Farm Bill language being developed, and you know, people are starting to get bills and amendments ready for Farm Bill. What else is going on these days in DC and elsewhere?
Yeah, good. Let me start with Farm Bill. So Lauren, way back at the beginning, mentioned that in the last Farm Bill, NSAC helped champion actually multiple marker bills, but one of them was the local Farms, Food, and Jobs Act. And the same primary sponsors of that bill back in 2012 and 2013, Senator Sherrod Brown from Ohio and Congresswoman Shelley Pingree from Maine, are planning to introduce a kind of corollary to that bill, updated to the current situation and really focused on regional food economies. We expect, one should never totally try to predict what is going to happen in Congress, but we expect sometime in the month of September that bill will be dropped in and become a discussion item leading to the 2018 Farm Bill. So we want that out there with lots of ideas, and then try to get those ideas into the actual Farm Bill as it moves forward. And we've been very successful with that approach in many different areas over many decades. So we're excited about that. Unfortunately, none of the items the last time that dealt with FSIS got into the final bill. So we're reworking it some, dropping pieces of what we tried before, get this formal stakeholder group that would include some of the people that have been involved in this process, but also union representatives and consumer representatives and others, to try to help formulate a more specific set of guidances and guidance revisions that would help move policy forward for very small operators. So that's the nutshell version of that idea. And right now we're trying to run some of the traps to see if we can get industry, as represented by NAMI in particular, to at least be neutral on the proposal this time, rather than opposing it as they did last time. So that's still a work in progress, but we're hoping that will be part of the bill, and if it does, we'll certainly get the word out and try to rally support for that. Another provision not related to FSIS that definitely is going into the bill is more in the rural development area of USDA, not just rural development, but all the loan and grant programs at USDA, many of which are at rural development, some are at Farm Service Agencies, some at Ag Marketing Service, but to make it really clear that there's a congressional directive to use any appropriate loan or grant program at USDA to help foster a more effective niche meat sector of the regional food economy. So that will be in there for sure. The FSIS provision hopefully will also be in, and again, we'll be letting people know, hopefully by the end of September, all the information you need to know to be in support of the bill. And we would, as advocates, strongly encourage everybody once it comes out to ask your members, both your 2 senators and your representative for whatever area of the country you're in, to co-sponsor that bill and show a good sign of support. So that's coming up. On the administrative side, you know, the big thing is the new administration, not so new anymore, will eventually get around to nominating people for the top positions. That's been an extraordinary slow process with this administration, much slower than any in my 40 years in the business. I've never seen anything go quite this slowly, but eventually there will be new people, new undersecretary, presumably a new administrator. And so as that happens, we'll, you know, certainly be trying to get to know them and trying to update them on this process. And I think we'll have good support from the people at FSIS who have been engaged in the process to date. I know they want to continue it on. So hopefully it won't be just a one-year phenomenon, but we'll go on after this. So that's certainly our expectation. I think it's the expectation of the agency people that we've dealt with to date. It will just be a matter of making sure that the new bosses, when they get nominated and confirmed, which might still be a long period of time, they don't seem to be moving with any degree of haste. So we're probably talking about well into next year sometime before that plays out. So we'll be following that. We do participate, and probably several people on the webinar participant list probably also participate in the monthly FSIS industry sessions, and going to that, not because most of the time they're not terribly interesting or insightful, but just to be a presence and to make sure that this sector of small and very small plants is well represented at that meeting that is otherwise obviously dominated by the big guys. So that's a little bit about what we're looking at. NSAC will be rolling out its Farm Bill platform as a whole in early October, so you could look forward to that. And for anybody looking for more information about us, I should have mentioned this earlier, our website is simply sustainableagriculture.net, and lots of information there for advocacy and information. So I think that's probably it.
Thank you, Ferd. How about everybody unmute their screens so that we can all answer the questions if they are appropriate to us. Let me pop over to the Q&A and see what we got in here. So let's see. Jolene Russell asks, what should be my concerns with planning for FSIS? I still intend to do HACCP plans.
But Rebecca, I didn't know that those would disappear. We were trying to answer some of them as we went. So if you'll click on the answer tab up top, there was a preliminary question to that.
Oh, okay. Well, let's start over there. Okay, so Jolene starts, I'm in Hawaii and in the process of building a very small plant for a ranch and animals. I'm attempting to stay USDA exempt because we are rural and we are small and we cannot work with our current plants because they are booked up. There is a mobile unit, but it is not affordable. How do you suggest that we proceed? Brian, go ahead.
I'd like to note that Brian gave a great answer there, and I think that there's lots of resources, both from NMPAN and a lot of folks in this group, to help you move on with that. I think with the limited time we have left, we might want to focus on a couple of the policy questions. And I think one of the things that Greg did answer, but I wanted to follow up, is Karen had asked about the Meat and Poultry Dialogue Group, their recommendations. And we have put out a few emails about this, and it was in the NMPAN listserv, but basically right now is a big sort of, okay, what do people think about this? And the folks who put that report together are out there shopping it around. And so that's kind of a, that's a next big question of what happens with that. Do pieces of it move forward? Does it wait to be a comprehensive package? And I would bring it up on the NMPAN listserv. I think the response time, it's a big report. There's a lot to digest. And I think folks are sort of trying to crawl their way through it.
Yeah, and I should say that NMPAN has a policy page on our website. And if it's not there already, I'll put a link to the Meat and Poultry Dialogue report that they developed so folks can read further about that. Let's see.
Rebecca had a last slide that gave you the link to the policy engagement page. And I know it's better to just stick where we are right now, but I'll take that link and put it up. And it just has a lot of these pieces that we've talked about today, including the recommendations document that Ferd referenced earlier, all the notes from the different meetings, and so forth.
Okay. Were there any other questions, Lauren, that you thought we should answer here?
I think we're good. I think if anyone has another question on policy, I think if the presenters have any questions for each other.
Yeah. We can open it up now since there aren't any other policy questions from the audience.
This is Ferd. I'll just also mention, I didn't mention in my opening that one of the topics that came up at the main meeting back in June was questions for FSIS to really engage us on in terms of the overlap. There are areas of overlap between the Food Safety Modernization Act and meat and poultry inspection. And so we will plan to have probably a brief, but report back from them and some conversation about that. So we're continuing to expand the list of questions. So also welcome participants in this webinar that have, sort of key questions that you would love FSIS to answer, to forward those through NMPAN, and we can get them, get them on the agenda for these meetings.
We have a question from Karen. Thoughts about the Prime Act? Anyone want to chime in on that? Lauren, Ferd?
Well, I can just, speak. NSAC does not endorse the Prime Act, so we are not working on that. I know that many people are, but it's not. How should I put it? It's a step or two too far for our membership, and so we've decided not to be engaged on it. That being said, we are looking for ways to expand access to processing even within the existing confines. So a good example of that also came up at the main meeting, where the question was posed: is there anything that would prevent a state-inspected plant from, on 1 or 2 days of the week, for instance, being a USDA plant for that specific day or two? And interestingly, even though we had the top policy person from the policy division at FSIS there, they did not automatically know the answer to it and promised they would take it back to the Office of General Counsel at USDA and try to get a read on whether that was possible. So that was just one particular main representative's ideas for how to sort of expand access and to interstate markets. So very open to those ideas. If other people have other positions on the Prime Act, feel free to chime in.
I just had one thing to add, which is that my thought about the Prime Act has always been I'm a little concerned about the unintended consequences for processors that want to remain under the custom and retail exemptions doing their thing. And if a state decides to change the rules around those folks because they could sell into commerce, that was something that when it first got posed, talking to some processors, that was a worry. My feeling about the Prime Act is that the most important thing it has done is put this debate out there front and center as a, to represent that people are really frustrated with the existing system and its limitations and are trying to find ways to get this kind of meat out to people who clearly are demanding it and are feeling hamstrung by the system that they're operating in. And so you see it in Maine, where they just passed a law saying, we're going to do it our way. And we have yet to figure out what FSIS's response will be to it.
Can I make a short comment?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, my comments on the Prime Act, I'll talk really shortly from both sides. We're full USDA on the farm and would never really apply to us. I think that in some ways, people will be really have very limited opportunities, even if the Prime Act passed, because the whole industry, from my perspective, is moving more towards requiring, in addition to USDA, third-party certifications and liability insurances and whole other kind of requirements that no way a Prime Act facility would pass. But the other side of it is, I think that most people don't even think about the fact that except for the handful of USDA inspected products, virtually nothing has, continuous inspection. And then a largest component of the actual meat and poultry products, at the large multinational retailers ends up being completely exempt. They can grind beef, they can slice deli meat without without daily inspection. And that is the largest number of pounds of exempt product. And then they're saying, well, we can't have exemptions in meat and poultry. It's like, come on, they're saying they can't have exemption. They have them already.
Right. Good point.
Does anyone else want to chime in on that? Ferd, is just sort of along those lines, is there any efforts in the next Farm Bill to expand the cooperative interstate shipment program, which would kind of potentially reduce the need for something like the Prime Act if that could actually be expanded or made a little bit less paperwork intensive?
Yeah, that's a great question. Not to my knowledge, I have not heard anybody proposing that on Capitol Hill. There are 4 states, I believe it is, that are participating. I have not seen any review or evaluation of how it's working in those 4 states or not working in those 4 states. That would be, I think, a key place to start. And then the other key, I think, would be going to the 2 or 3 other states that have started the process of thinking about applying, but then didn't go through with it, and what were the key things that stopped them from doing that. But it was a very difficult negotiation, a very intensive negotiation when it came to be in 2008. My guess is from the national level, the organizations that were involved aren't super anxious about reopening those negotiations. But I think if there was a clear evaluation report and path forward for what needs to change, I think that could open up the door for having policymakers engage on it.
One question I had for Brian, I wondered if you'd heard if they selected the new members of the National Advisory Committee on Meat and Poultry Inspection, and if there's any small plants represented there?
They have not. So I'm in my second year of my second term, and I have had no contact from them. So I think I think they're in a holding pattern. I don't know that they've selected new committees. They have not scheduled a meeting or anything. So I think that's kind of on the back burner right now.
That's what we heard from the representative from the Small Plant Help Desk from FSIS. We have a person from that desk on our NMPAN advisory board, and you're exactly right. It's just they haven't done it yet.
Yeah, and this is Ferd. I would just add that pretty much across the board, the advisory committees at USDA for the different agencies are pretty much, as far as I know, all the ones that we deal with anyway, with the exception of the Statistical Service Census Bureau one, are on hold. It is that's not atypical for the beginning of a new administration, but much like the nominations for the politically appointed positions at USDA, I've never seen it go this slowly. So it would not be surprising to see the holding pattern last for quite a while yet.
So are there any other questions from the audience or the panelists to each other? Anyone? All right, well, we put the link up there of NMPAN's policy page where you can read up more about different ways to get involved, you know, kind of different entry points to be more engaged in policy. Also, Ferd didn't mention, but NSAC has a FSIS policy listserv that we just talk policy, and if you want to be part of that, you can contact Ferd, right? Ferd, could you put your email up in the chat box?
Yep, will do.
I have one more question.
Sure.
If that's okay.
Yeah.
I was thinking back through what all the folks who spoke on this webinar said, and I wanted to go back to you, Brian, because one of the things you said in the beginning of your talk was that you were really impressed with what FSIS had said so far, and you have seen some changes so far. And I was wondering if you could kind of take us out on an example of a change you have seen that has affected your business.
So one of the big changes, and you know, one of the big items that we started with when we visited Greg's farm was humane handling and stunning. You know, and I think Denise has probably got some experience with this as well. And it hasn't happened real fast, but you know, the one stun, one kill rule, and I've seen it in different plants, and I actually got to witness it in my own plant yesterday by the face of, you know, kind of what went on. But you know, we had an inspector in that was the district veterinarian. You know, he comes around about quarterly to do verification on stunning. We actually misstunned an animal, took immediate action, and to my surprise, you know, at that point, you know, I think 6 or 8 months ago, he probably would have tagged everything and held up the process. Yesterday, he spent about another 45 minutes here, witnessed, you know, 2 to 4 to 6 more stuns after the miss, wrote an NR, said thank you, and was on his way.
Wow.
You know, so I think that's a huge step in the right direction. You know, and you know, we don't have that trouble here. It was one of those instances where, you know, it happened and he was standing there. But the way that he handled it, I was super excited of how that went yesterday.
Great. Thank you for that example.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I think that that concludes our webinar. I really appreciate everybody's participation. It's been great to hear firsthand accounts from all of our panelists. A recording of this webinar will be on the NMPAN YouTube channel. If you know folks who wanted to attend but were unable, that'll be up by next week. And we've put our contact information in the chat box. If you want to get a hold of us about the Oregon meeting or any other information, please shoot us an email. And with that, have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Rebecca.
Thank you.
Thanks all our presenters.
Thanks, folks. Bye-bye.